Imagine you have a safe in your house, holding your important documents and information like a birth certificate, financial records, medical history, maybe even a will. You probably never even think about that information until you need it. Now let's say, without you knowing it, someone has been copying the contents of your safe piece by piece and selling access to that information to the highest bidder. You would want to know who's getting that information, what do they plan to do with it, and ultimately, you'd want to stop it. Now this is the idea behind the bulk sensitive data rule, a new regulation from the US Department of Justice set to take effect this April. It's designed to stop foreign adversaries from gaining access to massive amounts of Americans' personal data. The kind of data that can be exploited for espionage, blackmail, and AI-driven cyber operations. Look, if data is the new currency, then bulk sensitive data is a national security asset, and the US is finally locking the vault. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Midweek Sitrep, your weekly briefing on national security law and policy. My name is Jerry Fowler, and I'm your host. Each week I break down what you need to know and what you might have missed in the world of national security and business, all in under 20 minutes, so you can stay mission focused. Now, before we get to the bulk sensitive data rule, let's discuss what we should be monitoring in the world of national security this week. Well, the big news right now, this past Friday, February 28th, President Trump met with Ukrainian President Zelensky in a high-profile meeting in the Oval Office, which ended abruptly without a resolution to finalize a mineral resources agreement. Now, as of Monday, March 3rd, the White House announced it will pause all military aid to Ukraine until President Trump determines that President Zelensky is making a good faith effort towards peace. This incident has raised concerns about the future of U.S.-Ukraine relations and the broader geopolitical landscape. Now, related, as reported in all major news outlets, prior to Friday's Oval Office meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had ordered a suspension of U.S. Cyber Command's offensive cyber operations against Russia. Now, sources say that the suspension does not affect other agencies' abilities, like the CIA or CISA, and it's thought that this suspension plays a part in Ukraine-Russia peace negotiations. Now, this is a huge story with significant geopolitical implications that you, as a national security-minded person, should stay up to date with. Now, speaking of geopolitics, China's two sessions political meeting has begun, focusing on key areas such as economic growth targets, military spending, and geopolitical strategies. Notably, discussions are expected on China's international stance and technological advancements, including AI developments. Now, staying in the region, in response to global economic uncertainties and geopolitical tensions, Hong Kong announced plans to cut 10,000 civil service jobs and implemented significant AI initiatives. Now, these measures aim to address a rising deficit and position the city as a leader in technological innovation. Now, in both of these stories, it'll be interesting to see how China reacts to the Trump administration's announced goal to further establish American dominance in AI. Now, speaking of AI, the upcoming Human X conference in Las Vegas is scheduled for March 9th through 13th and is set to be a pivotal event in the AI industry. With over 3,000 attendees expected, including executives, investors, and policymakers, the conference will focus on AI growth, regulatory landscapes, and the technology's global impact. So there's definitely going to be big news stories coming from that. Continuing with tech updates, on Monday, March 3rd, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or TSMC, the world's largest contract chip maker, announced a $100 billion investment to expand its U.S. chip manufacturing operations. The expansion aims to bolster domestic semiconductor production, reduce reliance on Asian manufacturing, and create thousands of high-paying jobs. Now, this is huge news for the semiconductor industry. and is seemingly another win for the Trump administration in securing massive investments for American technology, following the $500 billion investment for the Stargate project announced in January. Lastly, the chairman and ranking member of the Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party, in partnership with Coalition for a Prosperous America, will hold a press conference on Wednesday, March 5th at 2 p.m. Eastern to address China's unfair trade practices, including intellectual property theft, trade fraud, and tariff circumvention. The announcement also promises updates on legislation and efforts to bolster U.S. defenses against China's economic coercion. Now, if you're interested in national security and trade, and you're not subscribed to the Select Committee's newsletter or following their social media accounts, do yourself a favor and do so. With the Midweek Sitrep and the Select Committee's updates, you'll be well informed on what's going on. Now, each of these developments highlight the growing convergence of AI, cyber warfare, and economic security threats. Stay ahead by monitoring how these risks evolve. Now, let's get back to the bulk sensitive data rule. So what exactly does this rule do? And how does it impact business, national security, and even your personal data? Let's break it down. Issued under Executive Order 14117, preventing access to America's bulk sensitive personal data and U.S. government-related data by countries of concern, was signed by President Biden in February 2024. DOJ's final rule was issued during the holidays, and it takes effect April 8, 2025. It prohibits or restricts data transactions with 6 countries. Those are China, including Hong Kong and Macau, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. Any foreign entity controlled by these governments, even indirectly, is subject to these restrictions. So why is this rule necessary? We already have HIPAA for health data, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act for financial records, and state privacy laws like the CCPA. Why is this rule different? Well, it's different because it's not just about privacy. It's about national security. Privacy laws control how businesses use consumer data. The bulk sensitive data rule controls how foreign adversaries access large-scale U.S. data sets. So while this rule is about data, it's not about data privacy. Okay, so let's get into the rule. This rule regulates 2 major categories of data. The first is bulk sensitive personal data. This is where the thresholds matter. This rule doesn't restrict small transfers. It defines bulk based on the number of U.S. persons included. So here's a quick list. For genomic and biometric data, the threshold is 1,000 U.S. persons. For precise geolocation data, 1,000 U.S. devices. For personal health data, 10,000 U.S. persons. Financial data, 100,000 U.S. persons. Covered personal identifiers, 100,000 U.S. persons. Now, one stolen identity is bad. A data set with 100,000 financial records, that's a strategic weapon, and that's why bulk matters. Now, the second is U.S. government-related data. And for that, there's no threshold. Unlike personal data, any amount of government-related data is restricted. That means even a small data set is covered under this rule. So what is government-related data? It could be geolocation data of military bases and critical infrastructure, or sensitive personal data linked to government employees, military personnel, or intelligence officers. You see, the thing is your data isn't just information to adversary nations. It's fuel for espionage, AI warfare, and cyber attacks. Now, some people might say, who cares? What's the worst that could happen if China gets my data? I'm not important. What would they want with me? Well, think about the last time you got a suspicious email, or the last time your credit card got flagged for fraud. And I'm sure you've gotten phone calls and text messages from scammers. Now, imagine a foreign government had access to everything about you: your finances, location, health records, they had everything inside your safe. Well, that's not paranoia. It's already happening. Let's chat about the 2017 Equifax breach. 147 million Americans had their credit data stolen. According to the Department of Justice, the Equifax breach was caused by Chinese military hackers who exploited a vulnerability in the Equifax system. Now, this is the type of information that can be used to fuel AI-driven cybercrime and intelligence operations. Or how about the 2015 hack of the Office of Personnel Management, OPM? There, 22 million US government employees had their records stolen, which included information related to security clearance forms. Now, if you've ever filled out a security clearance form, you know the type of information that's on there. It's your entire life. And for a foreign threat actor, it's the type of information that can be used to track and recruit intelligence targets. And most recently, the North Korean cyber fraud incident, where in December 2024, DOJ indicted 14 North Korean nationals for a scheme in which they posed as remote IT workers, and they got jobs in US companies. Operating with these fake IDs, they earned over $88 million over a 6-year period through their salaries and extortion payments. They then sent the money back to the North Korean government, directly funding their nuclear weapons program and circumventing international sanctions. Now, this is happening with a few stolen identities. Imagine what could happen with an entire database of biometric data, financial histories, and geolocation records. That's how the government sees it. That's the risk. That's why this rule is here, and that's why you should care. So now you know why we have the rule, but how does it actually work? What does compliance look like? And more importantly, what happens if you get it wrong? The rule has 2 categories of transactions, prohibited and restricted. Let's take prohibited first. Certain transactions are prohibited, such as selling bulk genomic data to foreign adversaries, data brokerage transactions with restricted entities, and any government-related data transfer. Now, certain transactions are also restricted. Those include vendor, employment, or investment agreements with countries of concern or covered persons, which is a defined term you should look up. It also includes access to government-related data or bulk sensitive personal data. Now, this is where you really need to pay attention. Restricted transactions are permissible only if they meet certain compliance requirements. Now, those compliance requirements are established by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. They include implementing strict access controls, encryption, vulnerability management, and ensuring that no covered person or countries of concern can access sensitive data. Companies engaging in a restricted transaction are also required to minimize data exposure, use privacy-enhancing technologies, and maintain a secure network topology. Now, transactions that permit foreign persons to access U.S. government-related data or bulk sensitive personal data, they're restricted, unless the U.S. party imposes contractual safeguards on the foreign recipient. Now, the U.S. party must adhere to audit, record-keeping, due diligence, and security obligations. Now, there's a lot to consider when working to meet the government's expectations. You should consult with outside professionals to ensure your company meets these standards, because the penalties for noncompliance, well, they're significant. Currently, fines go up to $377,700 per violation, and the criminal penalties up to $1 million and 20 years in prison for willful violations. If you're not taking this seriously, the DOJ will come for your wallet and maybe even your freedom. All right, so I have a few thoughts on this. This may be a Biden administration rule, but make no mistake, it fits perfectly in President Trump's America First agenda. The Trump administration has made one thing clear. They see economic security as national security. We're seeing that with tariffs, investment reviews, and now data. The goal is to cut off adversaries from any leverage over the U.S., whether that's in trade, technology, or intelligence. With the Trump administration making AI a cornerstone of the golden age of America, it's clear that data will be near and dear to this administration. So not only does this rule serve as a strategic measure to restrict adversaries' access to large data sets, it also limits their ability to advance competing AI technologies. So don't look for President Trump to get rid of this rule, or leave it unchanged for that matter. Because like he did with another Biden EO, the Outbound Investment Security Program, I think eventually President Trump will have his administration examine this rule, look for gaps, and try to strengthen it. This may mean adjusting the thresholds to encompass more businesses. So if you deal in data, you should monitor this rule closely. Maybe it doesn't apply to your business today, but that could change. This rule isn't just about stopping data sales. It's about cutting adversaries off of the U.S. digital infrastructure. And if you think your business isn't affected, you might want to ask yourself how much of your data supply chain relies on foreign technology, because maybe that's where the government focuses its efforts next. Well, that's it for today's Midweek Sitrep. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and stay engaged. And while you're at it, stop by our store and pick up some merch. Link in the description and on our social media accounts. I'm Jerry Fowler, and remember, everything is national security. See you next time. The information provided in this podcast is for general information purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or professional advice. Listeners should consult with a qualified professional before making any decision based on the content discussed. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any government agency, the U.S. military, or any employer, organization, or entity with which we are affiliated. Mention of a company, product, or service in this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation. Any references are for information purposes only. This podcast does not disclose any classified, proprietary, or confidential information. Discussions are based on publicly available information and personal expertise.